So, hey everybody, welcome to this next part of the episode here. It's Liz. I'm with Sean Reynolds today. Sean, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come talk to me today.
Anytime, anytime.
Super. So at this point, you've probably already heard one or two of the interviews that we've had. And when we put out that fan survey the other day, thank you everybody who filled it out. It was great to receive some feedback from you all. We had a lot of comments saying that they wanted to hear more about this North Division. Never has it happened before where we've only played Canadian teams. Lots of people are saying it feels kind of like an original six thing where it's the constant same opponents, rivalries forming. It's been really exciting. So Sean here, first, before we get into that, I'll kind of for those of our listeners who don't maybe know as much about you, what you do kind of thing, I'll kind of let you give us a bit of your story, your time with Sportsnet, what you're up to now, and then we'll kind of get into it, deep dive into some of the teams and how the Jets fare among them. So, Sean, I don't know if you want to start us off with some of the more interesting things that you've been up to lately with Sportsnet.
Well, I mean, everything's been such a challenge with the pandemic and how that's handled. So I guess probably the most interesting part when we've been able to work was spending some time in the bubble covering the Stanley Cup Finals or Stanley Cup Final and the playoffs last year. That was an interesting experience for the first time going into a building and watching a game, without the fans. And the one thing that I have thought is really interesting about the fans not being in the building is that first shock of being in there and, hearing a goal scored and hearing, 20 guys yell for the goal and that's it, right? And it kind of fades really fast. But the one thing that I've thought is hockey really does take over. I mean, it's high level hockey. It's the best hockey in the world. And after a while, I think it was probably weird starting out for the players, not having that buzz as the fans. But in the end, good hockey takes over. And I think that that's what we're seeing right now. I don't think there's much of a difference in the product from what we've seen in the past. I think there is a little bit of that, if you're the home team and you score a goal and 30 seconds later you score another one, the way that the momentum builds in the building, that's missing. But for the most part, I think we're just really lucky to be seeing the hockey that we're seeing this year.
Yeah, for sure. I would agree. That's really neat. I'm sure, yeah, that bubble is hopefully a once in a lifetime kind of experience. Hopefully, we're never
Yeah.
going to have to do that again. But the fact that you can say I was there and these are the stories from it, that's super neat. And we had Ken on yesterday. Ken was saying that he was also there and stuff. And you guys have been working on some stuff together at Sportsnet, right? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that or as much as you can?
Yeah, well, it's nice to have a teammate. For the vast majority of my time at Sportsnet here, I was the lone Sportsnet guy. Myself and my camera guy. So everything that you did, you were either doing on your own, or every once in a while that have someone like CJ Chris Johnson would come rolling into town if the Leafs were coming in, and then you could kind of do some teamwork. You know what I mean? But it really was a one-man band for a long time. Now that Ken's here writing for us, and what a great teammate to have in Ken, who's been covering this beat for, I mean, years and years. I remember being a young man and reading him in the paper. So not that he's that much older than me, but let's just say he's older than me, because I got to hold that over him whenever I can. But, it's great to be able to have a conversation with someone else, and not only, away from the camera, but on air, to be able to kind of, because sometimes I find as a journalist, some of the best conversations that you have are behind the scenes when you're just discussing something. What did you think about this? What did you think about that? And then, at some point it clicks in about 3 minutes in the conversation. You're like, we should go find a camera and turn it on and record this, because this is good stuff, right? So we get a lot more of that. We're definitely trying to take our coverage online a lot more, which is something that we'll have to do here in Winnipeg, because we don't have the local rights to the Jets. So we need to find a place, or we need to find space for the conversations that we want to have. We've been doing Instagram lives before the game to just kind of give people access to, if they have any questions or behind the scene kind of looks. That's one of the things we've been trying to achieve. We got a lot of ideas in the hopper and a lot of things that we want to take forward. I think it's one of the most interesting parts about the pandemic is with sports having been missing for so long, and with the change and with the lack of fans, and I mean lack of fans in the building, it's really forced us to kind of try and find different ways to tell stories. So I think we're right in that moment where, you got forced into doing it, and what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention. I think we're kind of at that stage where we've just found there's different things that we need to do to reach our audience, and are kind of embracing that right now and just letting the ideas percolate, and hopefully that'll turn into a lot of different things.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Right. So this North Division has been really interesting for a lot of people to watch. A lot of these games, you feel like you've seen Calgary a million times, Ottawa a million times, but where's Montreal kind of thing? The schedules are just a little bit, they're interesting, they're cool. We've had like 4 days off now. Pierre-Luc Dubois suits up today. It's a very interesting time. So I was thinking maybe we could kind of go across, maybe east to west, go through the different teams, sort of give us a rundown of how they look so far, and the matchup against the Jets, if we have a sample to pull from or not. But yeah, maybe we'll start with, I guess, Montreal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Montreal was really interesting for me. My picks at the beginning of the year, the 4 teams that were going to make the playoffs, was Edmonton, Toronto, Winnipeg, and Calgary. But Montreal really vexed me the entire time because, what they did in the playoffs last year was impressive. And I really, really liked what they were able to do in the offseason. I really thought that they accomplished all the things that you would have wanted them to accomplish in the offseason. So when I looked at that lineup, I thought, this is a lineup that should make the playoffs. The one problem with the Canadians that we've seen year after year after year is just when they look like they've got it figured out, suddenly everything falls apart. So, for example, last year, they were doing well, and then they went on like a 10 or 11 game losing streak. And it was like, okay, well, that's it. Their season's over, right? They're done. And then all of a sudden they fought their way back and started playing really good hockey. And kind of, despite the fact they dug this massive hole for themselves, they dug themselves out of it. And around Christmas time, they were sitting in a playoff spot. So Christine Simpson was covering some Canadians games last year, and she wasn't able to. So right after Christmas, I got an emergency call to go cover the Canadians down on their Florida trip right after Christmas. So they're playing Tampa, and then they're moving down, and they're playing against Florida the next game. And they promptly lose both those games and start this string of losses again. And they ended up, I think, pulling off another 10-game losing streak. So what you're seeing from that is a team that's not learning its lessons. They're not figuring out a way to do this. And so I needed to see from the Canadians that they were a team that could learn its lessons, to kind of figure it out. One of the things that I think the Jets have done really well, I think the Jets do a really good job of getting everything they can out of their team. So, I mean, it's early, and maybe the Canadians are going to turn around and go on this 11-game losing streak. I don't think so. I think in order for them to be successful, Suzuki was going to be a really key player. He wasn't going to be able to have a sophomore slump. It doesn't look like he's done that. Kotkaniemi was going to have to look like he took a step forward. It looks like he's done that. Josh Anderson, Tyler Toffoli were going to have to be, everything that you could have imagined from them. And they've been that so far. You take a look at that lineup, and I think the Jets and the Montreal Canadiens are the 2 deepest lineups in the North. In fact, you were talking about some of the things we were doing. One of the things we've been doing online is this kind of change my mind kind of little show that we've been doing, where a Sportsnet personality from across the country can challenge another one with a statement. So it should be released later today. But Justin Bourne and I kind of challenged him and said, the Jets are the deepest team in Canada now with Pierre-Luc Dubois. Changed my mind. And then, he gives his reasons for why I'm wrong, and I give the reasons for why he's wrong. But when I made that statement, the Jets now with Pierre-Luc Dubois are the deepest team in Canada. When I take a look around, Montreal is the team that challenges that notion, because they're really deep in 4 lines. They're really deep defensively. And Carey Price, if the right Carey Price shows up, there's not a lot of holes in that lineup. So they, to me, are a really, really dangerous team in the North this year.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah, when we were looking at those lines that came out the other day the Jets have been practicing with, you have your Perreault, Lowry, Appleton on the 4th line. People are like, oh my gosh, we're going to roll 4 lines. What's this?
Yeah.
Like, what's going to happen? We're going to roll 4 lines. So,
yeah.
And people are comparing it to Montreal in that sense. They're like, Montreal puts out 4 lines and they have 4 competitive lines every night. So, yeah. That's interesting, because a lot of people this is a good segue into Toronto, I guess, think that Toronto is the deepest team in the league just because of their center depth is not bad, and their fourth line center, Jason Spezza, scores a hat trick the other day. So what the
Yeah.
heck? But I agree with you actually. Yeah, that Montreal probably across the board looks a little deeper than Toronto does, and possibly Winnipeg. I could humor the argument for that as well. So
Yeah.
Toronto. Let's. I know geographically maybe Edmonton or sorry Ottawa is next, but let's go into Toronto now. Probably lots to say about that team.
Well, I mean, I think when the season started, everyone takes a look at Toronto and thinks it's their division to lose, right? Everyone, when they were trying to hack out who are the four teams that were going to make it into the playoffs in the North, I think everyone started with Toronto, penciled that in, chiseled it in stone, and then started figuring out who the next three teams were going to be. And I mean, I think it's a fair comment from what we've seen from them, from what they've been capable of doing in the last couple of years. You know, they haven't had a lot in the way of playoff success. A lot of that has to do with the fact they keep running into Boston, who's one of the best teams in the league. You know, it's a bit of a you know, poor luck of the draw situation with them. But then again, they had their shot last year against Columbus and were knocked out there as well. So, and I actually do think, you know, the way that Pierre-Luc Dubois was able to shut down Austin Matthews in that series, it does speak to the depth that we're talking about. Now, depth can come in different ways. It can be that you've got really great guys, you know, 1 through 12 forwards and 1 through 7 defense. But it can also be that you've got, you know, your bottom 6 or maybe your bottom 3 are capable players that don't need a lot of ice time, and that the depth that you have is more up front in that you're going to put your best players against any other team's best players anytime. And so I think that's what you're seeing in Toronto. Is I don't think they're as deep on the forwards when you get into the third and fourth line. You mentioned Jason Spezza. He's capable of doing great things, but he's of advanced age, and you got to wonder how that's going to play out over the course of a season, especially a condensed, tough grind of a season like this. But clearly, when it comes, in my mind, when it comes to Toronto, their depth is the fact that those guys at the very top of their pyramid, and they've got a really thick top of their pyramid, are the kind of guys who are going to play a lot of minutes night after night. And they're the kind of guys that you are going to challenge and say, we think that our best guys can go against your best guys and beat them time and time again. And that's how we're going to win that game. Now, the Jets, I can see the way they're set up, are the kind of team that if they play Toronto in the playoffs, you can maybe match a guy like Pierre-Luc Dubois against Austin Matthews. And then, you know what, maybe you can get Adam Lowry some shifts out against the John Tavares line and kind of chew up some of the minutes it takes to shut those guys down. And all of a sudden you've got, you know, if the lines stay intact, which I don't believe they will, but all of a sudden you've got Wheeler and Stastny freed up against a third or fourth line. You've got Mark Scheifele and Nick Ehlers freed up against a third and fourth line. So it all depends on the way that teams are going to play it. But clearly in the case of Toronto, they're going to need, you know, contributions from their back end and contributions from their biggest stars in order to beat teams like Montreal and Winnipeg.
Right. Yeah. No, that's cool. Moving on to Ottawa, the more interesting storyline of maybe what we've expected and also maybe not as bad as we've expected, or for some people maybe it is. I don't know. What do you got to say about Ottawa and how they fare with the Jets?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I learned from Ottawa against in their games against the Jets is that when it really comes down to it, if the other team's top flight players are clicking, I really don't think Ottawa has a chance. So when you get Ottawa out there, yeah, they're plucky. Yeah, they're young. Yes, they work really hard. And, you know, Paul Maurice, when he talks about playing them, he says there's a certain cost. You have to have your energy at a certain level. And all that is true. But if you're the Winnipeg Jets and Mark Scheifele is having a good game, or Blake Wheeler's having a good game, or any of your top flight talent are having good games, I like your chances against Ottawa. Basically, if you show up and play against Ottawa and you're a team like Winnipeg or Toronto or Montreal, you're probably going to win those games. Now, the funny part about that is the two wins that Ottawa has come against Montreal and come against Toronto. So clearly, those are the teams that they've had success against. They haven't had success against the other struggling teams like Vancouver or Edmonton. I mean, I take a look at it as you know, it's kind of a battle of attrition with that team. You need to show up and play against Ottawa because they'll grind you and they'll give a good effort, and they're young and they can do that, and they've got something to prove. I do think that, you know, after they came out, they started the season, they won that first game against Toronto. Everyone was like, hey, this team is not a free space on the bingo card. Yeah, they're not a free space on the bingo card, but they're pretty darn close. And if you're a team, you got to show up and focus on those nights against Ottawa, because points are, I mean, it's an obvious statement, but points are massively important in this division. You can't be giving them away. And those are as close to free points as you're going to get in this division.
Right, yeah, because it's like, even when you look at like last year with Detroit, who seemed like the big write-off of the league, whatever, even Ottawa,
Yeah.
like at the end of the day, they're all professional hockey players. So it just takes a matter of a couple chances or a couple good games by some of the good players, and they can win hockey games. Like, it's not like it's crazy. But like you said, if you have these good guys who are elite league-wide, never mind just in the division, having good games, it's pretty hard for a team like Ottawa to fare against them, right? So
yeah, well, and to the point about needing to get those points, I think it was the Canadians last year who lost a bunch of games to the Detroit Red Wings. I'm not sure about that, but if my memory serves me correct, that's what happened. And so there's one of the problems with that Montreal Canadiens team is they had competed and done really well against a number of teams, and then you give up a bunch of points against a team that you really should be gaining those points against. And it really, you know, in the end, the play-in round happened and they got in, but they wouldn't have made the playoffs had that situation not arisen. And that would be one of the big reasons why. And, you know, it's going to be a real bummer for the team that finishes third or fourth or finishes, fifth or sixth in the North Division. And if they take a look and find that, you know, Ottawa stole 6 points from them and they missed the playoffs by 4 points, that's going to be a huge bummer, you know, especially if a team that you're chasing is a team like Winnipeg that has done a really good job of keying in and getting those points every single night against those teams. It's going to be a real bummer if you take a look at your season and say, oh, you remember that night in February where we just weren't really feeling up to it and we didn't give our best effort against Ottawa? Well, that's the difference between us making the playoffs and not making the playoffs.
right. And do you think, before we move on, there's anything like, if Matt Murray becomes Stanley Cup Matt Murray again, that they do any better, or is it just the team itself that isn't?
Well, I mean, I was watching a little bit of the Ottawa Edmonton game last night, and that's the suggestion, is that Matt Murray has shown up, and I mean, I think there's something to that. I just, you know, take a look at the Winnipeg Jets. They've really succeeded this year, and Connor Hellebuck is probably just now getting up to that Vezina form. They're winning without him. I mean, I love the idea of a team, you know, succeeding and doing really well because their goaltender is backstopping them and standing them up the way that Connor Hellebuck did last year. And definitely, you know, you'll see in cases of a team like Edmonton, if you're just not getting goaltending, it's going to be hard to succeed. But I hate the idea of resting your chances on if this goalie is going to show up or if this goalie is not going to show up. I think the idea is if you feel your goalie is not going to show up, you need to get really defensive as a team and play from the goalie out and give them all the help they can and help them build up that confidence. I think if the idea was you need Matt Murray to be Stanley Cup Matt Murray to succeed, well, Matt Murray hasn't been Stanley Cup Matt Murray since the last time they won the Stanley Cup. So if that was what you needed, it probably wasn't a fair ask of Matt Murray, who has not reached that level for some time, because, you know, without him doing that, saying our team's chances entirely rest on that, that's a very tough ask.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, now we're going to skip over the middle of the country and we're going to move over.
Big jump.
Big jump. We're going to move over to Calgary now. So Calgary, we're in the heart of a, 4-game, played 3, 1 left against them or something. I didn't realize, sorry to derail, that they had a game in the middle of this. I thought they also played the break. But anyways, Calgary, what do you got to say about them?
Well, it's interesting because when I had this conversation yesterday about the Jets being, in my opinion, the deepest team in Canada, I think a lot of the people, you know, in different markets who aren't paying as much attention as we are to the Jets, I think a lot of people had felt that the conversation of the deepest teams across Canada would have started with 3 teams, and that would have been Toronto, Montreal, and Calgary. And I think a lot of that has to do with how Calgary handled Winnipeg in the playoffs last year, and how it felt to a lot of people like the depth on that Calgary team is what killed the Jets. And I do believe it is. The one thing I'll couch that with is if you take 2 top tier talents like Line A and Shifley out of the lineup with injury, that entirely tears apart your depth. But fair enough. I think that when Calgary does play a specific kind of game, they are a very, very deep team and can challenge the depth of a team like the Winnipeg Jets. I just think the problem, as I've seen time and time again with Calgary, is getting that team all firing on all cylinders all at the same time. Now, I think that's a fair statement of every team. I think that's one of the things that the Jets are doing really good right now, is everyone seems to be going at the same time. But I mean, your depth is only as good as each player plays. If you've got 12 super capable players and only 6 of them are showing up at a time, then you're not that deep of a team. And I think that that's been the challenge time and again with Calgary, who last year had to have a coaching change early in the season because they couldn't get everybody going. Sam Bennett, who was a god against the Jets in the playoffs last year, really looks like he hasn't shown up yet with Calgary, and who knows, he may not be an option for long the way things are going there. I had thought it was really interesting at the start of the year. If you took a look at all the teams, there were such question marks around them all. The Jets, the question marks, are they going to be able to get beyond their defensive struggles that they had? And my question when it came to Calgary was, were they going to be able to get everybody on board at the same time? A lot of times guys like Johnny Hockey and Monahan look disinterested and they're not showing up. And so one of my questions was, well, is Johnny Gaudreau going to show up? Well, he's showed up in spades. He's one of the best players in Canada right now. And I still look at that team and think they're struggling because I don't think we're seeing the best from Sean Monahan and the rest of the supporting cast. You know, I thought against the Jets, really the Jets' depth outshone that team. And so is it time to panic for them? I don't think so. But clearly that team needs to get to a place where they need to be playing their best hockey at a specific time. So if Calgary is that kind of team that can hang around and stay in that playoff race and then put it together right at the end of the year and then go into the playoffs, I think they're that dangerous team that can knock off almost anybody. They looked really good against the Dallas Stars, who they lost to. And we know how good the Dallas Stars were and what a challenge they were. So, you know, if Calgary does end up making the playoffs and my team lines up against them in the first round, I'm worried, because if they do put it all together, they're a really tough team to beat. What I've seen from them against the Jets this year is a team that hasn't been able to put it all together. Take from that what you will. It's early. Again, they're hanging around. If they make the playoffs, it's a totally different story. So they're a team that has the tools. It's just a question of whether they'll be able to put those tools all to work at the same time, at the right time.
Right. And if they do, that's one of those teams that what you would see probably, this is just my comparison to years ago with San Jose and LA in the playoffs. It's 7 games in a row, you die against a team like that if they're all playing.
Yeah, they can grind you down. Yeah.
Totally, yeah. All right, Edmonton, the Toronto of the West. Never hear enough about this team. What do you got about them?
Well, I'll be honest. I'm confused by their inability to defend well. Another one of the ideas that we had online with Sportsnet personalities is playing a game of would you rather. So you take a statement, would you rather this, would you rather that, and then build your case around it. And so one that I find is interesting, which I think we're probably going to do right away, is would you rather have the Winnipeg Jets defense, or would you rather have the Edmonton Oilers defense? And like, let's play right now. If you take a look at the names that are on that Edmonton roster on defense, you know, the Darnell Nurses, the Bears, the Larsons, the Berries. If you take a look at the names that are on that roster on defense compared to what you have on Winnipeg's roster, if you're looking at it on paper, which of those defenses would you rather take?
I think I would rather take Winnipeg's, knowing what we have in the press box and also knowing that Darnell Nurse and Tyson Berry probably aren't the defensive defensemen that you need if you're looking to actually defend. I don't know. That's actually a really good would you rather question because I feel like it would probably split 50-50. Maybe I'm partial to Winnipeg and I want some of our press box guys to be playing, but I'm going Winnipeg. What did you take?
Well, I mean, I would take Winnipeg in the sense that they've figured out how to make what they have work. So, but I think the reason why it does work is because Winnipeg is playing, and you'll hear them talk about it, they're playing as a five-man unit. They had said this year they gave up way too many high-grade slot chances last year. They needed to cut that out. How they were going to do that is they were going to take their centermen and have them activate down low more often, bring the wingers down, scrunch everybody down into a five-man unit and just kind of create a shell around that area to deny those passes into the middle. And, you know, deny shots through, kind of create that turtle shell. And I think they've done that really well. But I would say, you know, based on what the high end of every one of these defensemen that we're talking about, I look at it and I think that the Edmonton Oilers should have a higher performing defense. So to me, that's the big question is Kyle Turris coming into that lineup. I thought he'd maybe be able to do more in that third line role than what we've seen him do so far, just because what Connor McDavid's line and then Leon Draisaitl's line are able to do, you know, in those top two spots. I think that you're having a lighter load as a third line than most third lines across the league. And it should have been something that he could handle. It doesn't look like that's happening so far. So they don't seem to have the depth out of the top six, which is troublesome. And they just don't seem to be able to defend that well. Their goaltending, they're not getting those saves. I think Edmonton is one of those teams, if they had been able to go out and snag a really good goaltender in the offseason, that suddenly becomes a team where if your goaltender can win you 3 or 4 games a year, you know, and clearly a guy like Connor Hellebuck did that last season for the Winnipeg Jets. If you can go out and have a goaltender that steals 8 points for you on the year, I think Edmonton ends up being a team that does really well. But clearly the same problems they had in goal last year exist. And clearly they haven't found a way to turn, team success or their entire team into team defense. It hasn't happened this year. And until they figure that out, I think they're exposed the same way that Chicago showed that they were exposed last year. Yes, Connor McDavid can keep you in any game, and Leon Draisaitl can keep you in any game. And we saw them do that against the Winnipeg Jets. The Jets had to, ended up letting one slip through their grasp and had to hold on for dear life in game 2 against that team, a really deep Jets team that had, Adam Lowry was firing on all cylinders in that game. And I thought that I think it was still Ehlers, Stastny, and Kopp at that time. Those two lines were playing formidably. I thought their fourth line was playing well. I didn't think the Jets' top line was at the top of its game, and clearly they changed because of that. But you take that team that, for the most part, the Jets were firing on all cylinders, and that Edmonton team is still able to hang around and almost steal games. That's the problem, though, is they always have to steal games away from good teams in order to win. And it's just not a recipe for success in the playoffs.
Yeah, no, I agree. And last but not least, Vancouver. That's probably the best one to leave for last because what the heck is going on over there too.
Yeah, so I feel proud about when I was building the 4 teams that were going to make the playoffs. I left Vancouver off that list. And I think a lot of the people that I talked to in the industry thought I was crazy for doing that and said Vancouver is a young team and they're a team on the rise. And clearly they were the team that went deepest in the playoffs last year out of Canadian teams. But I mean, if you take a look at what they did in those playoffs last year, they got, rope-a-doped for every game that they played, and their goaltender stole a bunch of those games for them and kept them hanging around, and that is how they survived. Again, in a short term, you can win some playoff series that way, but I don't think you're winning playoff series year after year after year doing that. And I think Chris Tanev, losing him was absolutely massive. Ken Wiebe and I had been discussing it on a couple of online forums that in that series that the Jets played against Calgary, Chris Tanev was the best player on the ice. He's absolutely phenomenal. So I don't think people really realized what was going to be lost when you lost that guy. I think that he allowed a player like Quinn Hughes to look really, really good, you know, and allow people in that market to think, well, we don't need a guy like that because we've got Quinn Hughes. And instead, now you're finding out the loss of a guy like that and their goaltending, losing a goaltender like that who probably stole them a number of games last year and earned them extra points, has just left them looking a little bit exposed. They're thin. They've got a lot of the tools to succeed there, but clearly, you know, their youth is catching up with them in this moment and digging themselves a hole. I mean, I was asking Sarah Orleski and I were at practice the other day talking about it, and I had said, like, do you think they're done already? I mean, and I know it's early to say that, but you can't dig yourself much of a hole in this division. They're going to have to go on a real big run to kind of cover off what's happened to them here. And it does look, you know, like a team like, I mean, last night against Toronto looked like they barely showed up and then went out and stole that game. If you can't win games like that where you dominate, it's going to be a long, long season.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and especially we've never seen this before, where when you lose points, it's automatically giving points to someone else, right? It's not,
Totally.
which totally it matters so much more this year than any. So yeah, so that's kind of a across the board summary of the different teams the Jets have had to face, and you did a really good job of kind of for each one talking about how the Jets fare against them and sort of how the matchups we've seen, the matchups we're going to see, and how it might go. What do you think, based on this 11, 12 game sample that you've seen, what do you think are the four teams that are going to make the playoffs now? Do you stick with your original thoughts, or has Montreal squeaked in there now? And Winnipeg, what is your playoff prediction for the North Division?
Yeah, you know, if you talk to some of the other journalists in Winnipeg, who I would have been talking to before the season, I agonized over Montreal, and I wanted to put them in there so bad, and I wanted to have them as my team that surprised. It's just they turned into one of those teams for me that it was like San Jose for all those years. You know, everyone thought that San Jose was going to win the Stanley Cup and they should win the Stanley Cup. And it just became, after a while, you know, every year you pick them to win the Stanley Cup, not me specifically, but you'd see analysts picking them year after year after year. And at some point, I just feel like with teams like that, you have to stay away from them until they show you that they can do it. You know what I mean? Like take the training wheels off and just you go and ride that bike and come back to me when you show me you can ride that bike. And that was the Montreal Canadiens. I needed to see that they were going to be able to put it all together because they'd showed signs of it over the last 2 years and then kept finding ways for it to all fall apart. So I agonized over it. I thought based on what they had that they should make it, but I took that approach. I regret it now. I should have done it so that I looked like I knew what I was talking about. Instead, I'm exposed, but I do think that they're in there. I think Toronto's in there. I think Winnipeg's in there. And I think it really is, for me, in my mind, a battle between Calgary and Edmonton. Now, I should probably pick Calgary just because my original four teams was Edmonton, Calgary, Winnipeg, and Toronto. So I shouldn't be I should stick with, but I had Edmonton in there as well too. I don't know. It's a real toss up for me because I had Edmonton ranked so high. I think I should just go with Edmonton because I had them ranked to win the division. Toronto second, Calgary third, and Winnipeg fourth. So for me to drop them out, that would be showing a real lack of faith. So I got to go with preseason Sean Reynolds and give him some props and say, I believe in you. I think this is going to work out.
Fair enough. Great. Well, that was super awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. Since this is my media episode, I have one question that I'm asking all my guests at the end. So I'm going to put you on the spot here. If right now you could make a move to acquire one player to make the Winnipeg Jets better, who are you acquiring? So not like Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl or something like that, like a move that could actually happen kind of thing, like moving to get a piece to make the Jets better right this moment.
Oh, geez. Well, I mean, I think the tricky part about the Jets is I think what they need to set them up as, I mean, if you can pull this off and the way the money is shifting, you could pay a player like this for years to come. I think what the Jets need is that 1A defenseman. Like if they had been in on Chris Tanev and found a way to bring Chris Tanev in, and Chris Tanev was your number one guy, this would be a team that for years to come would be a Stanley Cup favorite in my mind. The reason why those players aren't here is because they're not easy to come by, right? Like, so, I mean, it's a tricky one. I haven't thought it through, to be honest with you, because the way that the season's going, I don't know that they're going to be able to add anyone. So I'd have to say, I don't know. Like if you could package up a whole bunch of guys, a whole bunch of prospects, and make some kind of play to a team that had a defenseman like that, a number one defenseman that was looking towards the future. I mean, maybe you go and try and get a player like Josh Manson out of Anaheim, and kind of bargain the future, give away a lot of the prospects that they do have for the right now. I do think that that's the move the Jets need to make. So rather than saying a specific player, I would say I'm up for being for a trade where they're bargaining or sending away a lot of their future to get a guy that they can plug into the lineup right now. And then you have working alongside Josh Morrissey, alongside Dylan DeMello, alongside Neil Pionk. If you've got that, that one pillar in the 1A position and those other three players falling into 2, 3, 4, I think with what you have up front, you've got a team that is going to challenge for the Stanley Cup for years to come.
Awesome. Super. Well, thank you so much for coming and talking to me this morning. This was super fun. I love doing things like this. It was so great. Yeah, so thank you so much. It's been great to have you back on, and we'll see you again soon.
Yeah, you bet. I love it too. Thank you for having me.